today with the second in this series where I am going through the text of Gunther Anders entitled The World as Phantom and as Matrix. It's actually part of a more extended work, which is sometimes translated as The Obsolescence of Man, or in German, it's a translation of the German, I think it's something like Antiquarian de Mensch, or something to that effect. I apologize for brutalizing the German there. I'll follow up with the correct German pronunciation, etc., in the next video. But to get down to brass tacks, last time, or almost to get down to brass tacks, because I do want to mention that last time we sort of reflected upon chapter 1, section 1, where Gunther aims to dispel the notion that technology and the ethical, the social, the economic, the philosophical questions which arise around technology can be dispensed with if we understand it as merely neutral or instrumental, as simply as a set of potential means, the moral, ethical, philosophical, etc., valence or character whereof is a consequence of the particularity of their use. That's a long sentence, you just said, right? But, basically the sum of it is that we're being fundamentally dishonest with ourselves if we think that certain technologies do not, by their very nature, implicate us in projects that have definite repercussions, even existentially. And this follows from the circumstance that our life really is almost a sort of seamless fabric or tapestry. And while it's possible to conceptualize its segmentation, in reality it hangs together in a way which gives the lie to those abstractions. This is kind of a background point which he makes before proceeding to the argument proper. The first chapter, incidentally, is entitled The World Delivered to Your Home, which foreshadows the thesis that a consequence of broadcast media is a radical transformation of our relationship with the world from one which was dialectical or interactive or organic to one which becomes unilateral and fundamentally passive. The second section, the first one having dealt with ends and means, the second section begins with the sentence that today's mass consumption is a sum of solar performances. Each consumer is an unpaid domestic worker employed in the production of the mass man. So if you just, with this opening sentence, Gunther is actually alerting us to a few different things or moments that enter into his cogitations. The one being that there's a presumption of a certain construal of the capitalist framework within which we find ourselves ensconced. And now capitalism is a tricky word, but here Gunther is using it in essentially a Marxian or Marxist sense. It's understanding capitalism as a mode of production which strives to organize the elements of production in society in order to expand surplus value. Then take that surplus value, drive it back into the system so that it can then expand further to create more surplus value. Capitalism is a system of production which strives for unending expansion. That's a background set of assumptions that I'll just note are there without explicating them in this video at any sort of length. But there, from that background set of assumptions, he proffers an interesting point about the distinction between movies and radio and television, in tandem with his views on mass consumption and the production of what he refers to as the mass man, a category which is used often in mid-20th century literature, thought, philosophy, but which is, I think we've somewhat forgotten despite its persistent utility. What is the point he raises around movies and television? So with the movies, everyone goes to the theater and consumes the film, which is the product, together. And so it's tempting from this circumstance to say, well, this is what really epitomizes mass production. And then radio and television are sort of derivative. However, Anders, with a certain acuity, points out that this is a kind of a trick of appearance. In fact, radio and television are more in concert with the imperatives of mass consumption than the movie, because the movie industry is still working out of a theatrical tradition, a kind of archaic residue that is present in the manner in which we go to watch a film, at least that we used to watch a film, in a theater with a group of people together. Now, why are radio and television actually more effective in terms of subordinating people to the logic of consumption? The answer is that the ideal for mass consumption is the multiplication of consumers. It is a matter of indifference from the standpoint of the system's own imperatives as to whether those consumers take up the product in question all at one time in the theater or as individuals. The wonder of broadcast media and radio and television is that it actually not only permits this to happen with reference to the idea that you can consume these products in your own home, but even then, even if you're watching these products in your own home with your family and your friends, you're still then subject to a kind of atomization. Even if you're all in the same room watching one television, one program, you're phenomenologically, if you like, set into a consciousness of your own individuality. All right? Now, this then essentially lends itself very well to the original, or part of the original sentence. So we're all unpaid domestic workers in the production of the mass man, because that's what's happening when you're consuming a television or radio program. You're consuming a product on multiple levels. You consume the television, now you're consuming whatever's being displayed, and the ads drawing you to consume other things. It's a set of conditioning processes, not just in a sort of gross Pavlovian sense or Freudian sense, so that stuff is operating too. It's actually, I would say, relatively fundamental, because you are existentially deciding to receive this entertainment in a way, in a mode, in a fashion which designates you as a consumer. And not just any consumer, but a particular kind of consumer. A consumer which can be conditioned to exemplify a very particular set of desires that can be manipulated in a fashion which conduces to the realization of the producer's interest, the producer of the television program, et cetera, et cetera. However, of course, what's really the ultimate producers are not the producers of media. In fact, the ultimate imperatives of production are decentered from any individual, which is part of what's insidious about the capitalist framework. We are deprived of a concrete center of actors. Now, that's not to say that there aren't individuals who are of greater and lesser complicity with, if you like, the crimes of the system itself being essentially a great crime, but that is actually of secondary importance to the fact that the entire contrivance of it as an ensemble is demeaning to our humanity. And in this regard, one is almost reminded of Guy Debord and his The Spectacle, the Society of the Spectacle, where he basically mounts a very similar critique, sort of independently of Anders. But to draw back to what's going on here in the second section of the book, he sketches out how radio and television exemplify the logic of consumer society even more efficiently than the theatrical. I might add that perhaps the movie, if it's consumed in the theater, can impede that process, because the communal consumption and any kind of communal engagement, in effect, can act to create friction on the rails of the consumer logic. But also, what I find very engaging about this section is his invoking of the notion of the mass man, or if you like, the mass person or the mass individual. And in this connection, he makes, toward the end of the section, I think he has a nice way of summing it up. He knows that what you see transpiring in this process is the depersonalization of the individual and the standardization of rationality, the depersonalization of the individual and the standardization of rationality is carried out even in one's home. So it's not that the individual is annihilated. They are depersonalized. They are reframed as a set of potential desires or wants that can be harnessed to transmogrify them into mere consumers. So the extent to which they exercise agency, will, decision is mitigated, potentially aspirationally eliminated as per the logic of the system. So it's the category of personhood which is then aspirationally negated by not just the frame of logic of capital, but the structure of media as it arises in capitalism. This is already present with Anders' discussion here in the mid-20th century with radio and television, but clearly what he is offering is even more germane, relevant, at hand to our junction, where the notions which have accompanied mass digitization and all the rest of it take all these points and amplify their significance. We can look even at the concept of the avatar and the concept of configuring individual profiles as the outcome of demographies and statistics and trends of buying activity, trends of medical data analyses, right? And all these sorts of stochastic statistical approaches to the configuration of the human being, what you see is the trace or the subordination to the logic of the consumer society, which wants to create mass individuals that are just essentially aggregates of parts that be interchanged within a system, just like parts in a factory. And you see the increasing insignificance of the person for this system. And it all this sort of folds into the logic of broadcast media and the idea that even with reference to radio and television, you no longer have simply a mode of information relay. In fact, what you have is a mode of conditioning. So this is the second and still rather introductory section of the world and its phantom and its matrix. But I think even here at the outset, the gravity and the importance of Anders' thought becomes relatively transparent. To wit, we will carry on in the next video with section 3, where he opens with, I think, an interesting consideration of even how the spatial arrangements of our homes have been transformed in a way as a consequence of broadcast and generalized media after a fashion that reflects some of the things we've said so far. All right, guys, thank you for listening. I hope this is stimulating and of advantage to your person, and I will catch you guys later. Ciao for now.